Have you ever shared a small secret with someone you trusted, someone who stood close to you and spoke kindly, only to wish later that you had stayed silent because one simple sentence changed everything? We often believe that people who smile with us are safe, that people who listen to us, and that those who work beside us will protect our words. But sometimes the closest ears are not the safest, and sometimes the softest smiles hide careless hearts. This is the story of how one tired man learned that lesson too late. In a busy city full of noise, smoke, and long working days, there lived a simple man named John. He was a factory worker who had spent 8 years of his life inside the walls of a large cement factory at the edge of town. Every morning before the sun rose, he washed his face with cold water, ate the same quiet breakfast, and pulled on his faded blue uniform that always smelled of dust and sweat. He walked the same road, passed the same tea stall, nodded to the same guard, and joined the long line of men carrying heavy cement bags from one place to another while loud machines screamed around them without rest. John's hands were rough, his shoulders stiff, and his back ached almost every night. But he rarely spoke about it. He believed honest work was a blessing and silence was strength. At home, a small family waited for him. His wife managed the house carefully, and his young daughter ran to him each evening, hugging his dusty legs without caring about the grey powder on his clothes. Those hugs were the reason he never complained, never shouted, and never thought of leaving his job. At the factory, John was known as quiet and loyal, a man who never argued, never arrived late, and never caused trouble. Because of this, he trusted the people around him, especially his co-workers, the men he shared meals with during short breaks and stood beside for long hours. One of them was Mike, a friendly face who laughed loudly, asked about John's family, and spoke as if he cared deeply. Over time, John began to feel that Mike was someone he could trust. But inside John's body, something was slowly breaking. The work felt heavier than before. By afternoon, his legs weakened, and his mind grew tired from the endless noise and repetition. Still, he felt no anger toward the factory and no hatred toward his boss. He only wished for one lighter day, one small break, just enough to let his body recover. One evening, after a shift that left his back burning and his arms shaking, John walked home with Mike as the sun sank low in the sky. Near the factory gate, he stopped, breathed deeply, and spoke words he had never said out loud. He said his bones were aching, that the loading work was becoming too hard, and that maybe he would ask the supervisor for lighter work for just one day so he could rest. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with tired honesty and quiet hope. Mike nodded, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said he understood that everyone gets tired. Hearing that made John feel lighter. Being heard felt like relief. He believed he had shared his burden with a friend. He did not know that Mike enjoyed feeling important, enjoyed holding small pieces of news, and enjoyed the attention that came when others listened. And so, without John realizing it, his simple sentence began its journey away from him, slowly changing shape in other mouths, quietly preparing to return as something he would no longer recognize. The next morning, while the factory slowly woke under clouds of grey dust, workers gathered near the small tea stall for their short break. Cups steamed in their hands, tired eyes searched for warmth, and voices mixed with the sound of machines. Mike leaned closer to another worker and spoke in a low voice, saying that John was unhappy and could not handle the work anymore. The worker looked surprised and asked if John was planning to leave. Mike shrugged, as if the thought had already crossed his mind, and said maybe he was fed up. With those small changes, the truth began to bend. Tiredness quietly turned into unhappiness. A wish for one day of rest slowly became a desire to quit. As the hours passed, the words traveled from mouth to mouth, and each person added a little fear, a little imagination, and a little drama. By the end of the day, the story no longer belonged to John at all. It moved on its own, shaped by careless voices and curious ears. By the next morning, the rumor had grown faster than John's tired body ever could. One worker told another that John was planning to quit. Another said he was unhappy and spreading negative thoughts. Soon, a floor manager heard that John was becoming a problem, a man who might disturb others. Already worried about his own position, the floor manager passed this fear upward, changing the words again until the shift supervisor believed John was turning workers against the factory. When the story reached the senior manager, it had become dangerous, filled with panic and blame. No one thought to stop and ask John himself. Rumors were easier than truth, and silence from the accused was mistaken for guilt. The message finally reached Mr. Henderson, the factory owner, a proud man who valued loyalty above all and feared losing control more than anything else. All he understood was that John was a threat, a worker trying to leave and convince others to follow him. Instead of seeing a tired man with aching bones, he imagined rebellion, loss, and disorder spreading through his factory. In anger and fear, he decided an example had to be made quickly. Before the imagined fire grew larger, the next morning, John arrived as he always did. He greeted the guard, punched his time card, and picked up his gloves, unaware that his life was about to change. Before he could reach his work area, 2 security guards stopped him and asked him to follow them. Their faces were serious, their voices empty of warmth. Inside the office, John stood in front of cold desks and unfamiliar eyes. He was accused of betrayal, of spreading negativity, and of planning to harm the factory. The words fell on him like heavy stones. Calmly, he tried to explain that he had only asked for lighter work for one day. He spoke of his tired body and his honest intentions, but his voice felt small in that room, and his truth sounded weak against the loud shape of the rumor. The decision had already been made. His final pay was placed on the table. His name was quietly marked as unwanted in nearby factories. No apology followed. No question was asked. Only a door opening toward the outside. When John walked through the factory gate he had passed for years, whispers followed him like shadows. He did not look back. He only held his small envelope and walked forward, trying to understand how one honest sentence had turned into a weapon against him that night. In his small home, his wife saw the weight in his eyes before he spoke a word, and in the silence that followed his story, John felt something heavier than the cement bags he once carried. He felt the slow collapse of a life he had built quietly, day by day, believing that trust was safe. And as the city lights flickered outside his window, he lay awake, staring into the dark, wondering how truth could disappear so easily once it left the heart that created it. In the days that followed, the story outside the factory grew darker and uglier. People said John had been stealing. Others whispered that he was dangerous, that he could not be trusted. Wherever he went to ask for work, doors closed before he could explain. His name arrived before he did, shaped by fear and lies. At home, His wife watched him grow quieter with each sunrise, his shoulders bending under a weight no one could see. His daughter stopped asking when he would return to work, as if she already understood that some answers never come back. Bills began to pile up on the small table in their kitchen. Savings that had taken years to collect disappeared in weeks. The man who once believed the world was mostly kind now sat in silence, learning how fragile trust could be and how quickly it could be crushed by careless words. Night after night, he lay awake, listening to the city breathe through the window, asking himself how honesty had turned into punishment. After many sleepless nights, John made a quiet decision, not out of anger and not out of pride, but out of exhaustion. One early morning, before the city fully woke, he packed a small bag. He kissed his sleeping daughter on the forehead, gently, as if afraid even love might break if he touched it too hard. Then he left the city to look for work far away, in a place where his name was still clean and no one knew his story. Weeks passed. The factory continued to roar. Machines continued to scream. New hands carried the cement bags John once lifted. One evening, while checking old security footage for an unrelated matter, the factory manager noticed John in his final days. On the screen, he saw a man working alone, speaking to no one, showing no anger, no secret meetings, no rebellion, only silent labor, slow movements, and tired shoulders. A heavy truth settled in his chest. He called Mike and asked what John had really said that evening near the gate. Mike hesitated, then answered simply. John was just tired. He only asked for lighter work for one day. When this truth finally reached Mr. Henderson, regret followed it like a shadow. But regret is weak when it arrives too late. John was already gone. His place in the factory stood empty. His name lived only as a quiet reminder of a mistake made too easily and believed too quickly. And so the story ends where it began, with a small sentence and a heavy lesson. Not everyone who listens truly cares. Not every smile means safety. Words, once released, do not always return the way they left. Sometimes silence is not weakness, but protection, because sharing your pain with the wrong person can turn honesty into horror. And wisdom is not only knowing what to say, but knowing when to keep your struggles safe inside your own heart, where careless hands and careless tongues cannot reach them.